a morally sufficient reason for permitting this to happen. Yeah? Dr. Craig's God is too busy worrying to worry about the world's suffering, which he can't be sure is gratuitous. His God seems more worked up about what homosexuals do in the privacy of their own home, or to abstain from sex before marriage, or worse still, that God is an American and is right behind President Bush's bloodletting in Iraq. I don't think there's ever been a time in the history of the Christian religion where its God has been portrayed in such mean-spirited and trivial terms. If that is the God I'm supposed to worship, then I remain proud to call myself an atheist. Is God a delusion? No more so than many other human-generated ideas. But Dr. Craig's version of the idea, I have argued, acts as a barrier to broader, nobler renditions of this human idea. Albert Schweitzer seems closer to the mark when he said, "Only an infinitely small part of infinite being comes within my range. The rest of it passes me by like distant ships toward which I make signals they do not understand." Thank you.
You'll remember in my opening speech I said that I would defend two fundamental contentions tonight. The first of these was that there's no good reason to think that belief in God is false. Now, it's not clear to me after listening to Bill Cooke whether he actually thinks that belief in God is false. He redefined what it means to be an atheist. He says an atheist does not say that God does not exist, and therefore he's not claiming that God is a delusion. But he is asserting that God is just an invention. Now that seems to me to be a difference without a difference. If he means that this is an invention to which there is no objective corresponding reality, then he is saying that belief in God is a delusion, that is to say, a false belief. And indeed, this is the definition of what atheism is. Atheism is the claim that there is no God. Don't take my word for it. The Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a standard reference work in the field, states that according to the most usual definition, an atheist is a person who maintains that there is no God. So if Bill Cooke is going to defend atheism tonight, he is making a claim to know that God does not exist, and that requires justification. He says, but I don't even know what the word God means. It's meaningless. Well, for the purposes of tonight's debate, I will define the term God to mean a creator and designer of the universe who is the locus of moral value. There. Now, knowing what the word means, we can debate whether there is such a being, and I've offered several arguments to suggest that there is. Bill Cooke says, but the word God is just an expressive term, not as I'm using it. I'm using it to say that it means a creator and designer of the universe who is the locus of moral value. And the question is whether there is such a thing. He says, but you yourself, Craig, are an atheist. I only deny one more God than you do. I think that's simply a misuse of terms. An atheist is a person who makes the universal judgment, there is no God. A person who believes that there is a creator and designer of the universe who is to be worshipped, who's revealed himself in Jesus Christ, is clearly, in no sense of the term, an atheist. So I'm not an atheist in any sense of the word. I believe that God exists, that there is a God, and I'm willing to defend it tonight. Now, he finally says, but belief in God can have negative consequences. It can be a barrier and so forth. This is simply irrelevant to the truth of the statement that God exists. And so I'm not going to be drawn into a debate tonight over the social impact of religion on society and things of that sort, because all of this is irrelevant to the truth of the statement, God exists or God does not exist. Dr. Cooke does suggest something of an argument for atheism by saying that human beings are small and insignificant compared to the universe. So much time has elapsed before we came on the scene, and this is supposed to be some sort of an argument, I guess, for atheism. Now, what's odd about this is notice that this really underlines the truth of the first premise of my moral argument, that if there is no God, then objective moral values do not exist. Human beings are nothing on the atheistic view. He seems to admit it. But from my perspective as a theist, I think size is absolutely no indication of moral value. Why does something have to be big in order to be morally valuable? I see no reason to think that size is indicative of moral value. And as for the amount of time that's elapsed, time is of absolutely no consequence to a being with unlimited resources and time such as God is. So if God has chosen to create the world through a lengthy process of evolutionary development, that's his prerogative. And so I think there's no argument against God's existence. He attacks the evolution of Hebrew monotheism as something that has evolved. I don't think that's true. The very first verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:1, says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." The concept of Hebrew monotheism is the concept of a God who has created all that there is outside himself. But in any case, the point is irrelevant because it commits what philosophers call the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is trying to invalidate a view by showing how a person came to hold that view. So, for example, saying the only reason you believe in democracy is because you were born in the West, in Western society. That doesn't mean your belief in democracy is false. Similarly, even if Hebrew monotheism is the process of an evolutionary development, that doesn't prove that Hebrew monotheism is false. Indeed, I've given several good arguments to think that it is true. The final argument I see that has been presented was some gesture toward the problem of suffering, that if God exists, then we ought not to think that there should be so much suffering in the world. And the point from the quotation that he read from me is simply this, that the atheist, if he thinks this is a disproof of God's existence, has assumed a burden of proof which I think is simply too heavy for him to bear. He has to show that it's improbable that God could have morally adequate reasons for permitting the evil and suffering in the world. Now, if Dr. Cooke is willing to defend that, I'm interested to hear his argument. Give me the argument that would show that it's impossible that God could have morally adequate reasons for permitting the world's suffering. In fact, this argument has been largely abandoned, at least in its logical form, by philosophers today. Peter Van Inwagen, a prominent American philosopher, writes, "It used to be held that evil was incompatible with the existence of God, that no possible world contained both God and evil. So far as I am able to tell, this thesis is no longer defended." So again, if Dr. Cooke wants to give us an argument for this, go ahead, but until he does so, merely gesturing in that direction doesn't show that God does not exist. So in short, I don't think we've heard any good reasons tonight to think that belief in God is false. Now, have we heard good reasons to think that belief in God is true? Well, I offered 5 such reasons. Dr. Cooke says, but Hans Küng and Don Cupid and Schweitzer are unconvinced by arguments for the existence of God. Well, if this is to be more than just an appeal to authority, he needs to explain to us why they would be unconvinced by the cosmological, teleological, and moral arguments. The fact is that since the late 1960s, there has been a revolution in Anglophone philosophy and a renaissance of interest in arguments for the existence of God, such that a good many philosophers today believe that there are quite good reasons to think that God exists, such as I've described this evening. One of those would be the argument from the origin of the universe. Remember, it goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. We have philosophical and scientific evidence for that premise. From that, it follows that there must be a transcendent, immaterial cause of the origin of the universe. And Dr. Cooke has yet to respond to that argument. The second argument I offered was the design argument based on the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life. The fine-tuning is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design, and of those 3 alternatives, the most plausible alternative is design. Dr. Cooke has yet to respond to that argument. What about the moral argument? Remember, the first premise was that if God does not exist, then objective moral values do not exist. And here I think Dr. Cooke grants the point. He says human beings are just insignificant. It's illusory to think that we're of some sort of importance in the grand scheme of things. He seems to think that moral values are just products of human evolution. And this is the real question before us, not whether or not we can agree upon certain moral values to guide our lives by. The crucial question is, what is their foundation? Paul Kurtz is a humanist philosopher. And he writes that the central question about moral and ethical principles concerns